I graduated in the mid-90s, and that was the time of multimedia design. And I started with, that's not really interesting to hear that sound, making multimedia presentations about architecture. And I was much more interested in the representation of architecture than in bricks. So I started moving away from building and started becoming a book designer. Here you see my studio. We are in Amsterdam. We are 8. It's me, 4 designers, a secretary, and 1 or 2 interns. 5 nationalities, 1 Austrian designer. And this is what we do. We make books. These are some of the books that we've made in the past 15 years. And I show you the books, but that's roughly 75% of our work is making books. And given my kind of background, the majority of these books are kind of architecture and urbanism related. And so that's anything from architecture monographs to books on individual buildings. It's documentation of competitions, and more it's the representation of architectural research. That's academic research. There's kind of collaborations with TU Delft and with a university in Zurich. So the production of knowledge or the representation of knowledge is kind of is a big thing. So that's the academic research, but also collaboration with museums where we look at their collections or other themes. And PhD publications. And these are actually the atlases. So of those 150 books I showed you roughly, these are only the atlases. So they're kind of a really small portion of the production. But working with maps, working with diagrams, visual indexes is something that comes back in many of the titles. Okay. It's already mentioned, in Eindhoven, the Design Academy, I'm head of a master, information design, and that maybe sounds like information graphics only, but it's a bit broader. It's really about the relationship between graphic design and digital technology, and what kind of the consequences that has for the profession, and about the new balance that needs to be found between publishing information and reading information. So we look at news, we look at knowledge, but we also look at the kind of the consequences that technology, the chances of technology offered to designers. So this is my lecture, of the title of the lecture, More Matter but Less Art. It's a quote from Shakespeare. It's a conversation between Queen Gertrude and Lord Polonius. And Lord Polonius is a messenger, and he's trying to very embellish his language, make it very beautiful. And she doesn't like it at all. She hates it. So more matter but less art. And he said, oh, no, I swear I use no art at all. So, but more matter but less art is kind of my motto of my designs. I don't want to show you the atlases tonight. But I want to show you what came after the atlases, because it's an important part of my profession, but of my portfolio. But I think it's maybe more interesting to see what would be good out of it and how we applied it to other books. So what is an atlas? It's and why I think it's kind of a very appropriate, very urgent format for the time we are in today. It deals with complexity, it deals with lots of information, and then offering the reader several ways in. And I show you some kind of pages from books that I've made and some of the atlases. Why I think the atlas is interesting for graphic designers, because it's really about translation, about translating data, information into using the full palette that the graphic designer has. So color, shape, maps, everything. And it tries to relate things to another. So in this case, this is a page from a Phoenix Atlas, 2008 Atlas. Here It's about creating a relationship between an aerial photograph from 1996 with a plan for a new area that will be built, that probably will be finished around now. And by just showing them in the same scale, somehow you understand what happened in that kind of time and what kind of things in the landscape were kind of used in the design. But it's also combining a plan with data about ground use, public space, building typologies, and relating them with color. So the colors here are the same colors as there. So it's about creating relations. And an atlas is a tool. It's a tool for the reader. But it's also about color. It's also about beauty. It's also about a physical object. I think the atlas is a very appropriate book typology for the day and age we're in. So that it allows us kind of to look at complex situations. So to summarize, this is for me an atlas. It deals with complex content. It's about non-linear reading. It's about translating information. It's about indexes, offering the reader different ways in, and it is an information tool. But tonight I want to show you actually atlases without maps. Can you use the same kind of thinking to non-cartographic topics? And I'm going to show you 4 books that deal with different topics, and they all use that kind of methodology. But I also want to look at these things. Map without an atlas. Can you use that? What kind of we learn about maps from this kind of from the atlases and how we apply them to situations? So I'm going to show you a map. I'm going to show you a typeface, and I'm going to show you an information graphic. Okay. First book I want to show you is a collection book about a museum. It is the Boijmans van Beuningen Museum in Rotterdam. It's the second largest museum in the Netherlands. It has 4 collections from classic art to contemporary, and also. And just to give you an idea how a process like this goes, it's a project of over 2 years. That means 20 meetings, many emails. So you talk with a couple of people from the museum, giving the situation in Dutch cultural landscape. That's kind of 13 women and 1 man. So during the project you have 3 pregnancies. And we are kind of 3 designers. To start with, the first thing I do if I do kind of a new book project like this is I'm going to buy books. Because it allows, I just want to get to know the typology. I'm going to get to know the typology of the collection book. So I bought some things that the Boijmans van Beuningen published, and I looked at. So I just for me, kind of studying, I found out that buying books and looking at them saves me much more time and money than starting to sketch. So I start by reading, and it's always nice to buy books. So it's kind of it's good. Collection book is a kind of strange book typology because it's not really a book. It's not really a narrative. It's a bunch of things put in an alphabetical order, and they just happen to be. They happen to be kind of bought by a museum over time. So that's kind of some of them are very conscious. Other things are kind of accidents or things that they got. But if I look at this is a page from the Boijmans van Beuningen collection book. If I look at these kind of pages, I wonder where is the collection? Where can I see the collection? And I couldn't. So I started thinking about how does a collection look like, and well, very stupidly, I came to images like this, the 19th century museum, where the works are kind of put on the wall in a kind of high density, or images like this, where there's kind of a close relationship between the architecture and the works. And you almost get the idea of some of the works, are they there because they're good, or they're part of the collection, or are they there because they fit? And I think that's kind of a nice tension, and I thought I wanted to use it in the book. And of course, it's also the way how our museums store their works, so that they're all put together in this kind of rack. So my first sketch for the for this book was, what if this is the collection? And so I make a map out of it, basically. Yeah? So and every page of the book would be basically a kind of zoom in of this. And the nice thing is that you see bits like this and this, so you feel the kind of connection that the work has that you're looking at to the rest of the collection. By then it was decided that the museum didn't want to show the 130,000 works that they have, but they wanted to show 163 works. So you start to see if you can make this for 163 works. So we put things on the page together, and then you see that then the problems start, because if you get this a large work next to a small work, and immediately this gets all the attention. Now it's in black and white, but if it would be color, if this work would be red and this would be gray, then this would all get all the attention because of the color. So how can you design this kind of what we called cloud by then? Well, we did our best, but we couldn't. We somehow noticed that you cannot really design it. So we involved a programmer to work with us to make a special tool to design this thing, to create this thing. But from these sketches, we got some kind of we got to know the cloud as a kind of, and what the rules are of the cloud. So this kind of should not have any composition. It should be the images should be the same size. Should be not too much white, and the thing as a whole should feel like fit to page. So there's kind of a close relationship between the thing you're looking at and the architecture of the book. So we had this tool that basically you upload an Excel file and images online, and then it generates pages. So you give it the dimensions, and then it generates things like this. And we had this kind of line in the middle because it's the fold of the book. So you have some kind of happy, and then in the morning you can do 50. And then when we had many of them, we started to tweak and look at white space and look at, and so we hand tweaked this kind of cloud, and somehow this came out. And this became kind of the basis for the book. While we were doing this, we were also doing other things. And one of the things that the budgets I work with are basically, I have budget to do one extra thing. So I can make a book and I have budget to do one extra thing. So it's foil, or it's extra color, or it's something with the binding. And I decided for this book that I really wanted to have these things, thumb cuts. It's really, I think it showed, it really made the book into a tool, and I thought that was kind of nice. And it makes it more interesting as an object, and there are different ways of doing it, and this is the way that they are kind of done by hand. So they were done by hand in Poland, which was not, so there's 4,500 books, and then 5 of them per book. The problem was not so much the budget, it was quite cheap, and it's Poland, not the German side of Poland, but it's the Russian side of Poland. So the problem was the transportation time. So I had to convince the director of the museum that we had 6 extra weeks of production time. So that was kind of the thing. But I thought it was really interesting and really important for the book that you get these things there, that you really feel them. Okay. Another thing was that I wanted to show the difference between the museum, the institute, the museum, the collection, and museum, the building. And because we had a little over 2 years, we occasionally could photograph the empty museum. So I thought maybe it's interesting to start the book with photographs of the empty museum, just enough that it becomes irritating, and then you can start the book. So we had these photographs taken, and that's kind of the start of the book, almost as an introduction, as a kind of trailer, like the James Bond movie. You get a kind of first thing, and then the book really starts. I want to show you some of our sketches and how we worked on the typography. That we are kind of, although I'm not a graphic designer, I have people in my staff who are graphic designers. So we really the detailing and the getting everything right, and controlling the typeface and the white space, and well, it's all done. The thing that I want to go into a little bit more in depth is the index, because that's something that I learned from the Atlas. It's a very effective tool. I already showed you this. This is kind of the image of the collection, but it would be great if you could look at it in different ways at this collection, and that would be kind of an interface to offer the reader ways in. So you could organize it by time or differently. And because we had this tool, that we could organize the work differently. So we, for instance, had the works from big to small, so that the size of the work is translated into the size of the image on the page. So small work is like this, and the number underneath is always the page number of the book. So it's a way in. So it's an alternative kind of table of content. We also made a timeline when the works were made, but we also made a kind of timeline when the works became part of the collection, almost like the politics of collecting. So that, for instance, a Rietveld chair that became part of the collection 80 years after the kind of it was made. So it shows something when certain kind of works or types of works became collectible. But I also wanted to show a very arbitrary way, so we organized it by color. And we did this kind of both as a kind of for the 163 works, but we also did it in a more abstract way for the collection as a whole, all the 130,000 works. Okay, there are 4 editions of the book, different language editions: German, French, English, Dutch. And here you see this kind of the thumb cuts. What can I say about it? So we started the book with an empty museum, and the last index we showed in the end was kind of, we did a kind of test of how many museum buildings you would need to show the whole collection. There was kind of 19 buildings around. So here, kind of where the artists were born, so there is a kind of a map there. You see the amount of museum buildings you would need for the whole collection. Okay. Another project I want to show is the book called MVRDV Buildings. MVRDV are Rotterdam-based architects. You might know them from buildings like this, but they also are kind of very active in the field of publishing. They made many books that are kind of full of diagrams, kind of those kind of bricks. But they wanted to make a different kind of book. They wanted to make a book about their buildings, what they built and how they were used, basically. So they asked Andreas and Ilka Ruby are from Berlin as a kind of editors. And I was involved as a designer, but maybe I want to show you something before I show the book. A few images. I showed you that I work on. I make many books on architecture, and if you're making a monograph, you get a folder with a few hundred images, and you go through them, and you select the right image. And I was working one day on a book on a Japanese architect, and I saw photographs like this. And this, and this, and I thought, who brought the chair? And then I thought about the chair. It's a very nice chair, and not that expensive, and it's small, and you can maybe easy to carry. So maybe the photographer took it in his back of his kind of car to the building, to almost like as a symbol of use, huh? Kind of the symbol of the human skill, and that made me think about if this is the building process this is kind of the life of a building, with the design process, construction, and then there's a small vacuum, and then the buildings start to be used. We tend to take the photographs here. And for the MVRDV book, I wanted to have photographs of different moments, just to show the different moments of the building that it was used. And I especially wanted to have different kinds of photography and different kind of photographers to emphasize this kind of use thing. So I wanted to have photographs of the users, of course the professional photographers. You cannot deny them because they make the best photographs. But we also got MVRDV themselves involved, so the photographs they took with their cell phone during the building process, and social media. Well, MVRDV have a kind of 60,000 friends and online. So we posted a kind of a questionnaire. We want your pictures. So we wanted to have pictures from the architectural tourists, because architects, they do one thing, they travel a lot and they take photographs. So we wanted to have those kind of photographs in. So we got many photographs in, like a few thousand in the end. So this is about the amount of photographs I got, and I selected 681 photographs to be part of the book of 156 different photographers. So that's, of course, there's the professional photographers, and that's everything from the photographers. They were kind of they got a commission from MVRDV to other kind of professional photographers who took it. But we had an equal amount of number of photographers we contacted through social media. We also asked the users if we could we got their photographs and MVRDV, and we had some other things that like Google Street View we used, but we also used film stills of movies where MVRDV buildings are in. So this is kind of the top buildings with the number of, who are the most kind of photographers. So Studium is a building in Amsterdam, 21 different photographers. And you really, this is the book. Well, since we are here and MVRDV is not here, I can explain you why I make this cover. MVRDV is 3 people. It's M, it's VR, and DV. And so I put also 3 people on the cover, just 3 random people. But I also like that however you look at them, there's always kind of 2 against 1. So it's a couple against a single person. It's 2 men, 1 woman. It's always 2 against 1, and I wanted to show that. And I also made this cover that I wanted to take a photograph, and I blocked everything out, and I emphasized the users. And the black is in a kind of transparent silk screen, so it shines a bit through if you have the real book. The texts are kind of interviews with the users, and what I wanted to do, I wanted to avoid the emblematic image, because that's what you see a lot in architecture books, that you get the image, the money shot that shows the whole project. So I wanted to have no money shots, and also in the kind of how the typography was there, deliberately mixing text and image, almost like a magazine-like approach. One of the things that I did, because we had these kind of different photographers, and you can of course trying to control it, the photography, even if it's a bad photograph, by cropping it neatly. But I decided I didn't want to crop the photographs. I wanted to really show them in their kind of shitty quality. And then the kind of how they were, the composition I made was kind of the thing. So you got many pages like this where you just got many kind of photographs there. And they're all, so per spread, they deal with a specific topic. So this, of course, has a danger of becoming chaotic and just being purely funny. But I try to select them in such a way that they tell something about the building. So they deal with the use of color in the kind of public spaces like corridors and toilets, how they use that in their buildings as a kind of counterpoint. But next to that, we also singled out some big photographs that were really about the use and where the building is almost a backdrop of a kind of social event. So it's this kind of ritual or party, but also kind of a hangover after a night of drinking too much. To kind of balance this kind of flow of images, I wanted to have the drawings that we presented give them especially more interest, more attention, that they got a different kind of concentration within this kind of flow of superficiality. So what we did is we colored all the drawings, and we also drew in the hues. So all the hues, as you see in the photographs, were drawn into the drawings, and all the materials get the colors of the materials in the end. So of the building. So they are kind of so you really feel how these buildings work. Of course, this is crazy because you spend like 3 days per drawing page on making this, and if you have this concert hall, of course you draw in all the audience, but we also wanted to all give them a different color. It's a bit freakish. So we started with this building, somebody vacuum cleaning the building for a performance. Kind of nice opening shot. We have movie stills from we even have Pierce Brosnan in the James Bond in the book. And it's kind of a list of all the projects they ever did. Okay. This is a really recent book. This is a book that was presented last week in Zurich. It's a PhD thesis of Dean Simpson he did at the ETH, and it's a typical big book. And big, I mean really big. So it's quite a lot of kind of stuff that we have to. So partly it's about controlling the amount, and 145,000 words is really a lot. So if you look at kind of the median length of a book on Amazon is half of that, and a maximum length of PhD thesis at Leiden University is 100,000 words. So it's about somewhere between the new old and the young is the young old. So it's partly this very academic publication with a kind of proper typography and diagrams that we all redesigned. And, photographs. Young old deals with well, the third age, with how old people now create their own kind of utopias. So it looks at 4 case studies in the US, in Japan, and in the Costa del Sol. And well, what I wanted to talk about now is especially the drawings that we worked on with Dean. There were kind of separate sections in the book that deal with kind of these kind of drawings that Dean made in the beginning. So it was kind of the isometric, and I feel through Google Earth that the isometric and through other kind of, in recent years through CAD technology, that the isometric is becoming kind of a new default of an urban drawing. And it has a kind of long tradition, going from this, but also I think I'm always very much inspired by Atelier Bauwau, and the black and white outline isometric is become this kind of standard. And I thought, or maybe talked with Dean, and we said maybe we have to push it one step further. So we first try to color these kind of drawings. But then we found out, because we're looking at 4 case studies, and they're so specific. One of them is the trailer community in the US. The other one is kind of a theme park, Dutch-style theme park in Japan where people live. So they were so different that if you would draw it like this, then you would really emphasize the architectural differences, which Dean was much more interested in to emphasizing the programmatic differences. So we started to see how we can push the drawing into something different, and that we could show the program. So it's just making many tests and then talking about it. In the end, it became this. So it's very bright and colorful. I'll talk a bit more about it later on. I am really influenced now by, so all the drawings are kind of bleeding off the page, so they go off the page. There's not a kind of frame around them, and I feel that's, for me, I'm very much influenced by things like this. But they're really kind of, the device determines the kind of the cutout. We use colors that are kind of not referencing kind of the materials, but they're more about the program. So all infrastructure has to do with blue, collective it's purple, yellow is something else, there's health, there's food. So you get this really, and we also use it on a kind of smaller scale. If you looked at kind of architectural objects, or even vehicles and furniture. And we printed these in kind of neon inks, so really fluorescent kind of colors. So it's really ultra bright on a slightly matte paper. So there's kind of this fluor ink has a kind of its own kind of materiality, but very matte. So it has a kind of very nice contrast. In a way, as a designer, you're also playing a lot with conventions. And of course, if you think of old people, you think of this. You think of different shades of pastel. But these are kind of different people. So I didn't want to use the pastels. I wanted to, this is exactitudes, by the way. It's kind of but I wanted to have it very bright, or another color we use a lot is kind of also green, has a kind of counterintuitive thing. The nice thing is of this kind of, these fluor inks that we used, we also used them for the photographs. And you got these kind of very surreal photographs that are already surreal by themselves. By giving them this kind of fluor inks, they became hyper surreal. So you're looking at something from a different planet. So it's really a big book. It's you can really kill someone with it. It's 576 pages. That's really heavy. So actually, it's kind of this. On the one hand, it's academic publication, and then in between are this kind of very bright. So the typical kind of academic publication with a kind of in between these sections of kind of color happiness kind of. To give you an idea, it was kind of the golf carts, because one of these the villages in the US is kind of based on golf cart infrastructure, because you don't need a driver's license for it. So all slopes, all corners, all parking is for these kind of people who are drunk and driving in golf carts. Okay. I want to show you a map. But before I want to show you the map, I want to talk first a bit about this Google Earth. End of 2005, Google Earth was introduced, and I'm still recovering from it, because it completely changed my kind of perception of what a map is. It's from a map which is kind of a framed bit of reality on a page. It becomes kind of this continuous world that you can scroll in all directions. And from a very precisely kind of cut out piece of land, it becomes kind of this thing that you happen, that whatever you are, where you are, whatever device you're looking at, decides kind of this cutout. And we're pinching and we're zooming, so there's not really a specific scale that we're looking at. And even on a kind of detail level, a map is all about legend, but why would you still need a legend if you can have reality itself? So these kind of three notions of the map as a kind of framed bit of reality that you look at in a specific scale through a very specific filter, that's kind of questioned by the new technology that we have now. So frame, well, our device and how we pinch determines the cutout. So it's not longer a kind of narrative device for the designer. Scale. Yeah, you can still wonder what is scale if your device determines the scale you're looking at it. And the legend, well, why would you still need a legend if you have this? If you can have this, but there are certain kind of realities that are kind of difficult to get even if you have this kind of photograph. So for instance this is Belgium. This is highly complex. This is more complex than this image. Because what we have here in one image, we have food production, we have living, we have infrastructure, we have production, we have recreation in the garden, and that's all intertwined. And if you would put that on, if you would look at the map, then you think you get it. But if you look at, if you're in Flanders or in Belgium, then you don't get it. So. If you look at a small map of Belgium, you see this, and you understand. You think you understand what it is. This is a kind of it's a few big cities with some smaller cities in between, and in between there's nothing. But if you're there, it feels like one continuous sea of nothingness. You could call it Zwischenstadt, you could call it whatever you want, but it's kind of it's fantastically complex, and it's more interesting for me than an urban setting. So I was. I was part of the curatorial team of the Belgian pavilion, or the Flemish pavilion of the Architecture Biennial in 2012, and I wanted to make a map of this nothingness. But given my kind of, that I'm a book designer, I don't know how I can use a map to tell a story. So for me, a long time it was kind of, how can I tell a story with an image? So I'm used to the juxtaposition as a kind of device. So I put two things next to each other, or like this, and that's how I tell the story. So it's about time, 1996, 2008, or plan and data. So how can I tell a story with one image? But then I saw this wonderful Richter painting that from a distance you think you get, but if you come up close, it becomes paint, material, matter. I thought that's interesting. So you have kind of you could have a juxtaposition by distance. So how far you are from the image determines how you look at it. So that's what we wanted to use for our map. So we used GIS, so that's kind of a geographic information system, so highly precise data that we that we applied in a 1 to 2000 scale, so that it feels a bit pixelated from a distance, but that if you come up close, it almost feels like hand-drawn, and it almost feels such a way that you don't need a legend to understand it. You see what you get, and there we put on top of each other these different kind of layers of food production, recreation, living, energy, infrastructure. So we started to look at scale 1 to 2000 on 2 squares of 50 by 50 meters, so which is 2.5 by 2.5 centimeters, like a stamp. And we just started to see what is 50 by 50 meters. So we started making drawings and then see how can we play with this, how can we make this, make it into line drawings. And if you project many things on top of each other, you get these kind of different layers of the reality, and then that became one big map. So we are in Venice. It's the inside of the pavilion. It's a group show, so there was kind of a few architecture studios, like architecture work from Brussels. There's architects, the Velde Vinctailleux from both from Belgium. There's a Grau, urban design studio from Paris. Ante Timmermans, who's a Belgian artist, and I made this big 15 by 4 meter map. And I really wanted you to come close, so I put a door in. You were kind of forced to approach the map, and from a distance it looks really pixelated. But many people were looking at it like this from close. Some of you just passing by, of course, but and from up close you really get all these kind of layers. So, for instance, this one we had 2 different ways of land use. So we had the red horses and the yellow cows. So yellow cows is for food production. And red horses is for young girls with horses who just lose their countryside. And it's actually a terminology in Belgium that is about the horsification of the countryside. So they're not longer using the countryside for food production, but for, well, girls with horses. Okay, another thing. I was offered a page in a newspaper, German newspaper, a few weeks ago. And I said, do whatever you want, as long as it's not published. We cannot pay you, but we can offer you 500,000 people reading it. So that was a very tempting offer. Most of the time, people who could offer this page, they made a kind of artistic sketch. But I really wanted to do something with the context of news. And I wanted to do something with mapping, showing something which I don't understand really. So I wanted to do something with these guys. And especially how the United States Army, how they communicate about their efforts against these guys. So it's a very interesting website, the United States Central Command, that in a very detailed way every day tells you what they've done. It's utterly detailed. It's almost like you almost feel like a strategy behind the detailedness. So it's not giving you information, but giving you data. And it's kind of what they do. We attacked 5 bunkers, 4 vehicles, a bulldozer, so I was kind of. And with it, they also post unclassified movies. So you basically see, probably filmed by a drone, what the attack, what it means. So it's this. Sorry. actually this was more happening than bunkers, just like Toyotas who kind of attacked. So it also makes you wonder, do you really have equip a kind of F-16 fighter jet with kind of anti-tank weapon for Toyota? So it's kind of, well, it's full of it. Let's not. And I was at the other time. I was so this kind of strategy of offering data, offering pixels versus this kind of reverse strategy of the news services to deal with it, to offer some kind of overview. But the language that they use, this kind of news websites, is really the language of year reports. So it's this, and it didn't feel appropriate somehow. And I thought, can I do something? I don't want to quote Tony Blair, but I was looking for a third way. And I thought, well, maybe I have to look here. Probably all known by you, kind of Otto Neurath, Gert Arndt, but this kind of language nowadays, that's kind of still a bit tricky. So it's really filtered, and I remembered this, and I didn't want to filter, I wanted to show how it is. So again, we started to draw, and how precisely should you draw these things until you get it. So we came to something like this. So we wanted to make kind of visualizations of 3 or 4 months of US attacks against IS. So you can make something like this if you would just put a list. But this didn't feel right somehow. This was, of course, very much into the kind of in a very straight grid-like manner of isotype. But this might work well for this, or this, but not this. Watch the shoes. So how can we do that? So in the end, we decided to do a very subtle thing. We just had them slightly different. So instead of one car, we drew 20 different cars in very subtle angles. But it had a kind of huge impact on the page. So instead of that, you get this. So a bit more chaotic. And especially on a larger scale, you got, rather than this, you see this. You're looking for the right density. It's kind of, we did it in, I think in 2 weeks with 3 people. Kind of test, and then we simplified the typography a bit, so we didn't repeat all the months that we had. We used 2 colors because we looked at the attacks in Iraq and in Syria, so they both have their own color. It became this page. So basically, this space is what I got, and the rest is done by the newspaper. It's the really large size newspaper, so you look at the hands. So it was, and we were thinking on rotation, offset, and then color. So that was tricky, but we managed to get it right. And here you have the explanation of the colors. Okay. Something completely different, a typeface. A typeface that we've been developing over the past 10 years. And we developed it to index, basically to use in our own work. So the typeface consists of shapes and letters or numbers inside, and it's such a way that you can even make double numbers. So it grew in the end to quite a big family of shapes, and in the beginning it was just developed for use with numbers. So we use it in atlases, where we use create these kind of things, or even in academic publications where we linked diagrams to text, where they kind of referenced in, and we start to make other diagrams with it. And here's a small video. So that's something, that was the sound that I needed today. Then we started to also include the letters. So it's designed for ultra small use, for really tiny things. And very complete with all the accents that you need. But also, it's also opened up different kinds of uses that we didn't think. So it's nice that I just realized recently that not every design project needs to lead to a kind of final object or product. It can also be a half product, like a tool, like a typeface that other people can work on. So it's here you see it how we used it before. Some of the books. So we intend to publish it with Optimo Type Foundry, and it will be available probably in the next few months. Okay. Last project I want to show is a book I made 2010 about my own work. I swear I use no art at all. I already showed you the quote of Shakespeare. The subtitle of the book is 10 years, 100 books, 18,788 pages of book design. I was working for 10 years and I noticed that I've made 100 books. I thought, well, maybe I should look back as a kind of year report. I'm very interested in year reports because it's an interesting kind of typology that companies look back. On the one hand, they look back, that they use data of what the past, but how they present it, of course, tells them about the ambition of the future. And that was one thing why I wanted to was interested in it. The other thing is that a fellow student of mine at Rietveld, he did his practical training at Aldo Rossi's office. And at all the drawing tables, because it was pre-computer time, there was a kind of big book lying, the complete works of Aldo Rossi. So every time you were drawing and you had a kind of problem, you had to look in the book. And if it was already there, you had to draw it from as it was done in the book. So you didn't, and then only if it was not designed before, you can go to Rossi to ask how to deal with it. I thought that was interesting as a kind of the book or the monograph as a memory of an office. So I made the book, and I used the ceremony typeface. So it's all books are kind of referenced by numbers. So one being the first book I designed, and then up till 100, and I started to look in different ways to my work. So I made a kind of a timeline from being trained as an architect and doing my first architectural jobs, and then slowly the books come in, the black squares all reference to books, and then gradually the books take over. But I also looked at how the books were kind of financed, who printed the books, who the authors of the books were, but I also looked at the floor plans of my studio, who sat where, and how it was organized. So it was really making an atlas of my own work, of my own way of working. it ends with this is the first part of the book, and it ends with a kind of list of names of people who I work with and showing the different roles. So you see that, for instance, this one is a very important person. It is Marien Klauwe. He's a kind of a production manager of a printer. And with him I have a very intense relationship, but others are just like one night stands for certain titles. Another part of the book looks at my design motifs, or how I work. So it looks at the grids that I use, it explores the binding methods, it looks at the Pantone inks I use. So I have a preference for green, and also if they're kind of metallic inks or fluor inks. Typefaces. And the last part of the book shows 15 spreads, one-to-one. But I wanted to show them as kind of graphic interfaces, not as bits of content. So as a trick, I turned all the text around. So this Nas Oxynar is San Francisco. So every word is kind of turned around so that you look at it as a kind of graphic interface. And it's printed in the two colors of the book, black and pink. I can never use pink. Architects don't like pink, so I use pink for my own book. If the book is bigger than the I swear book, then it bleeds off the page. What I didn't show in the book were the books themselves. I talked about with whom I made it, where I made it, what things I used, what ingredients I used, but I didn't show the books themselves. And to emphasize it, there's also an essay. The books are there, but they're kind of hidden. They're kind of in between the pages. So if you want to see them, you have to cut open the book. Almost as a kind of, so that's kind of challenging the reader. And then you get, of every book you get a cover and a spread. So the book was made in 2010. I didn't, I financed it myself, because in Netherlands you have this kind of subsidy system, so if I'm going to tell them this concept, nobody will not give me money. So I just said, okay, I'll do it myself. I won a kind of prize, and I had some money, so I made the book and just putting it there and just see what happened. And then I got two very good reviews, one in the New York Times and one in the Süddeutsche, and then it was sold out within 2 weeks. So we decided to make a new edition, financed by the publisher. But I want to add something to the book. In the meantime, the second edition is also sold out, and now we're checking if the third edition is if the market is positive about it. So. So I wanted to do something for the second edition, so I added a map. Basically, it was a kind of a sheet that on the one hand shows some information about the book, but on the other hand it shows a kind of map, and it really doesn't show well on this slide. But what we did, we tracked down where all the books were of the first edition, where they went to. So we tried to find out where all the books were, who bought the books. And we kind of made a map of it. Well, you don't see. So this one, this I show. So we got all the locations, and you have three different kinds of things, or if they were kind of bought at the internet or at a bookstore, or they get a kind of review copy for journalists. We tracked them down as far as we could. So Lakewood is the warehouse of Amazon. So that's why we couldn't track it beyond Amazon. But that's kind of the extra that you get with the second edition. You get a map of with 1,500, I don't know really, of these objects. Okay, that was my last slide. Thank you.